Hello, this is your flip video lesson for 2.01, The World Turned Upside Down, The American Revolution. This goes along with your Human Odyssey reading pages 352 to 367 and your student guide pages 232 to 236. Lesson Introduction, The World Turned Upside Down, The American Revolution. In the late 17th century, the English people celebrated the Glorious Revolution. 100 years later, their country faced another kind of revolution. The once loyal colonists in North America were rebelling against British rule. The rebellion drew on the past and changed the future. The American Revolution was based on the ideas of the Enlightenment, and it helped inspire democratic revolutions around the world. Learning objectives for this lesson. Many of these objectives are covered in detail in the reading pages from your Human Odyssey book, pages 352 to 367. Describe the disadvantages the American Army faced and the importance of French aid in winning the war. Describe the events that led to war between Britain and the colonies. Explain why Parliament imposed taxes after 1763 and why the colonists reacted as they did. Identify George Washington and his contributions to the Revolution. Identify Montesquieu, Locke, and Jefferson and their political ideas. Identify the U.S. Constitution as the world's oldest functioning written constitution. Summarize the arguments Thomas Paine put forth in Common Sense and their influence on colonial opinion regarding independence. Summarize the attitude of most colonists towards Britain in 1763 and the reasons for their attitude. Summarize the major ideas of the Declaration of Independence. Summarize the reasons for a constitutional convention in 1787 and its accomplishments, and review historical events. Number 1 and number 2, these go along with your student guide pages. Okay, so make sure you have your student guide open and you're filling these in as we go along. So this covers questions number 1 and number 2. This is about John Locke. English philosopher, he was an English philosopher who wrote in his 2 treatises of government that all people have natural rights. The rights John Locke discussed were life, liberty, and property. And this covers question 3 and 4, the British Empire. Britain's colonists were so proud to be part of the British Empire in 1763, in part because they had just helped defeat Britain's longtime rival, France, in the French and Indian War. They also took pride in their English heritage because of their rights and freedoms as Englishmen. Many colonists refer to Britain as the mother country because the great majority of North American colonists were of English descent. And at any point in time, when you're doing this on your own, if you need to pause this video, you're more than welcome to do that. This covers number 5, 6, and 7. Numbers 5, 6, and 7. Britain's taxes on the new colonies. Britain had not always kept careful control of the colonies. The colonists despised the new taxes imposed in 1765 by the Stamp Act. It was named the Stamp Act because this law said that most printed material, newspapers, pamphlets, almanacs, legal documents, even playing cards, could only be published on paper bearing an official stamp, which the colonists had to buy. When colonists shouted, "No taxation without representation," they believed that government had no right to raise money from the people without the consent of the people through their elected representatives. Number 8, Montesquieu. French Enlightenment author, The Spirit of the Laws, who defined tyranny as the exercise of power beyond right. So this was about Montesquieu. Questions number 9, 10, and 11. The Boston Massacre, Boston Tea Party, and the shot heard round the world. The Boston Massacre occurred in 1770 when British soldiers fired on a group of colonists who were protesting the presence of soldiers in their town. 5 colonists died, which then further upset the colonists. In 1773, a group of colonists disguised themselves as Indians and made their way to Boston Harbor. They boarded 3 British cargo ships. The colonists resented the tax the Parliament had put on tea. To protest the tax, a group of disguised colonists split open the 342 crates of tea aboard the British cargo ships and tossed them into the harbor. Afterwards, the colonists joked about the Boston Tea Party. So if you're wondering where it got its name, that's where. When British soldiers clashed with colonial militiamen in Lexington, Massachusetts in 1775, The gunfire of the militiamen was, a poet later wrote, the shot heard round the world. And again, as I said at the beginning of this flip video, there's a lot more information about this in your Human Odyssey book, your reading pages. So please make sure that you are doing your reading requirements to make sure you're getting a full understanding of this lesson and of these questions. Question number 12, Common Sense. Common Sense was the name of a pamphlet published by Thomas Paine in 1776 that convinced many other colonists to favor independence from Britain. Okay, so we're gonna take a quick pause. That says a quiz pause. Sorry about that. It should be a quick pause before we move on to question number 13. So you can take a look at pages 232 and 233 in your study guide, your student guide, this one. Okay, and these are questions that are in there. You can fill them in. All right. So Paine insisted that institutions of government should be reasonable. Was it reasonable for a king to rule colonies far away? Paine answered no, definitely no, with a resounding no. When Paine said, "'Tis time to part," he meant that the colonies should become independent of Britain. According to Paine, of more worth is one honest man to society than a king. Paine described a king as someone whose ancestors had stolen other people's land at the point of a sword. To Paine, there is something very absurd in supposing a continent to be perpetually governed by an island. Paine argued that the parent of America is not England, but Europe. What evidence did he present in his argument? So people had come from all parts of Europe to escape tyranny and seek civil and religious liberties in the colonies over in the New World. Paine argued that the king was not a proper power to govern the American people. Why? Paine argued that the king would have a negative effect on any government of this continent because he has shown himself to be an enemy of liberty. Okay, so that was page 232. That was a little break from the regular questions that we've been going along. All right. So this again, page 233. And again, the headline says, let's take a quiz pause. It should be, let's take a quick pause. So the British point of view, and then the colonist point of view. The British point of view over there is on the left. And then the colonist point of view is over there on the right. So again, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this in the flip video lesson, but when you're doing this on your own, you can take a pause and you can fill that in. Okay? All right, back to our regular questions. Question number 13, Declaration of Independence. In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson argued for certain unalienable rights that were endowed by the Creator. Those rights were life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The right to resist and replace a ruler who has become a tyrant, the right to abolish a government that is destructive of the people's rights. Questions number 14 and 15. George Washington and the Continental Army. The leader of the Continental Army was George Washington. He showed great leadership. He kept his army together through the grueling winter at Valley Forge, ready to fight again. He promoted the Marquis de Lafayette to general in the army, and he defeated the British at the Battle of Yorktown. The Continental Army faced many disadvantages. At the beginning of the war, the British had twice as many troops as the Continental Army. American soldiers often quarreled with each other and refused to take orders. The British Army was well trained and disciplined. The British had a large number of German mercenaries. So those were questions 14 and 15. Again, as you're watching this on your own, you can take a pause. Number 16, 17, and 18. Assistance, loyalty, and the final major battle. The Americans desperately needed help from the French. The French sent much needed money and arms and gunpowder to the Americans. The French had a powerful navy, which the Americans did not. Colonists who remained loyal to Britain were known as Royalists or Tories. The last major battle of the American Revolution was fought at Yorktown in Virginia. Question number 19, Articles of Confederation. The government for the new United States was described in a document called the Articles of Confederation. There were some weaknesses in this new government. Congress had very little power. It could not collect taxes. It could pass laws, but the states didn't have to obey them unless they wanted to. The Congress had no power to force states to meet their obligations. Each state passed its own regulations about commerce with foreign countries. States ignored treaties that didn't suit them. They decided whether or not to fight the Indians on the frontier. They built their own navies. States even printed their own money. The central government was weak and defenseless against its enemies. Questions number 20 and 21, the Constitutional Convention. Americans called a constitutional convention in 1787 to draw up a constitution and to create a stronger central government. They wanted the 13 states to behave more like a single nation. They needed to draw up common laws and regulations and protect themselves from foreign enemies. They were putting into effect the ideas of enlightenment. The U.S. Constitution is unique in that it is the world's oldest functioning written constitution. It puts into effect the ideas of enlightenment. It guarantees the rights of people. So we've come to the explore and discuss section, which is at the very end. So we've described the event known as the shot heard around the world. Now that you've finished the chapter, now that you've finished your reading, really think about that phrase. It comes from the poem written by Ralph Waldo Emerson in 1837. Why do you think Emerson used that phrase? So I'm just going to pose this idea to you, but you may have a different thought. Perhaps it's the idea that the American Revolution inspired revolutions around the world. And if you take a look over here at this chart, let me get my pointer here. I'm having a hard time pulling it over. If you take a look at this chart down at the bottom right, you can see those are different revolutions that happened after the American Revolution. So perhaps they inspired some of those revolutions. So we come to the end. Freedom is one of the deepest and noblest aspirations of the human spirit. And that was said by President Ronald Reagan during his inauguration speech. And then we have a picture here of Betsy Ross. She made the first flag for the colony. She and a group of women, but she was coined as the leader of that group. Okay, thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.